Welcome. Welcome back here as well. Some of you have been before, many familiar faces here. As Lisa explained, I'm really a jewellery historian. I'm specialised in the materials and technology of jewellery over 5,000 years, give or take a week. And today I'm going to look at a slightly different aspect of the thing I normally look at, and that is the sort of the design side of things. And assuming this works the way I think it will, the title, which was actually given to me by Lisa, was The Primacy of Design. And I want to raise some questions. I can't give you the answers, but I think I can raise a few questions, and at least get you to sometimes think a little bit about what we're talking about when we talk about jewellery design. This is you might like the design, you might not like the design. It's very simple, clean lines, or whatever, and it's about 3,500 years old. It's a European Bronze Age piece, late Bronze Age, in gold. Simple design, clear, elegant, and one can judge it on the basis of beauty, aesthetics, and to some extent craftsmanship. But when we look at... No? Am I supposed to point that? Yeah. When we look at jewellery across all cultures, all periods, different areas, it's quite difficult to actually work out what we mean by design when we talk about design. What do we actually mean by the expression design? We use it all the time. Design, jewellery design, and so on. But what do we actually mean by this? I'm starting with this because I'm in America and, I'm in New York, so we've got to show the Statue of Liberty. The reason I'm showing this is because this is actually a design. This is an American design patent for the Statue of Liberty. This was produced prior to the Statue of Liberty being made, and it was originally produced as a patent to protect the design so that they could make copies of this design in other materials, metals, clay, pottery, whatever, they didn't have plastic in those days, in order to try and finance the construction of the actual Statue of Liberty. So this is a design, and it's an American design patent. It's quite interesting because the American design patent mechanism actually gives us a definition of design in these terms. It says design consists of the visual ornamental characteristics embodied in or applied to an article of manufacture, which doesn't really say very much. Almost anything can be put forward as a design patent. That's what it says. That's the definition by the American, the patent office in the States of a design. This piece you might recognize, Van Cleef snowflake brooch, famous piece. This actually was also a design patent. That's the original design patent, 1946. Now, if you want to see the original thing, that's the Claude Arpels, New York, and so on, design patent. So, what does this mean, design? We keep using this term design when applying to jewellery. So when Lisa told me, I want to talk about my usual stuff, a history of jewellery, something fun, with the past, and Lisa said, no way. You've got to talk about jewellery design, and she's quite a forceful woman. So I couldn't resist this one. But design you tend to think about jewellery design or any design, you tend to think of the present. What's happening now? It's a very sort of modern, contemporary, isn't it? Design, it's art. What's happening now? Maybe a little bit of predicting what's going to be around next season and so on. But design seems very much of a now thing. So I thought, this is not my subject. So I'm going to talk about design in sort of yesterday and tomorrow. Yesterday, because I'm on safer ground, and tomorrow, because nobody can really contradict me. So I want to raise the question of what does jewellery design mean in the context of the past, and then where is jewellery design going, and a little bit about what we call the devaluation, which is quite a hot topic in the general design world out there, the so-called devaluation of design. Right, this is a splendid guy, isn't he? This was designed by a French goldsmith in the 1920s. No, it wasn't. That's bullshit. It's South American, about 2,000 years old. But you see, knowing where it comes from and the culture changes your view on the thing. If this was 1920s French, you can see this fits in with all your interpretation of what was going on in the world and what the French were like and their weird sense of humour, whatever it happens to be. Seeing it as pre-Columbian, it's totally alien. The guy that made this might have sort of been watched human sacrifices. So it's very difficult to judge what we mean by design going back through history, different cultures, because you're trying to see things in totally different alien contexts. We don't know what it means. This could be a contemporary piece. It's beautiful. Simple little gold pendant. It's actually from somewhere around the Balkans, maybe what's modern Bulgaria, maybe down into northern Greece. They believe it's a fertility symbol. It's been suggested it's the essence of woman. I guess the jeweler was a man. But you see what I mean? That you can't really judge this the same way as if you were judging this piece being produced by a modern jewellery designer. Because it comes with a whole lot of other cultural baggage. You've got to look at jewellery of all periods in its context, which makes it very difficult to think about what do we mean by design in the past. Just take an example. This is a very simple Roman gold earring. It dates to somewhere around 250, 300 years AD. And this is a type of Roman earring. You find it pretty well the whole way across the Roman Empire, large area, and you can find almost identical ones. Chuk, 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 chuk. There are people who write doctoral theses on Roman jewellery, defining the types. This probably has a number. This is type 48B/C or something. Because there's not a lot of, if you like, innovation and individuality in most ancient jewellery. You see pieces and you see types, and you can classify them according to the type. There's not this same kind of every piece is an individual. There's innovation and excitement. It's all very, very different world. My notes have just turned themselves off. Look at another piece. This you probably recognize. This is one of Tutankhamun's piece. Beautiful piece, beautiful object. In the middle, the Yellowstone, by the way, you might have read this is in National Geographic a few years ago. It's one of this desert glass found in Egypt. Some huge great sort of comet blew up just above the desert and fused a lot of glass. So the yellow in the middle is that. It's got lapis lazuli, it's got a lot of gold. But you can read it. You can read it like a book. Mary's in the room, she can probably read it, Mary Chipman, Egyptologist. How many other Egyptologists present? Not many. But you can read it. The top, you've got the moon in the little boat crossing the sky. You've got the eye there, the eye of the sun god Horus. There's the boat you see there. You've got the scarab, winged scarab, the snake symbolizing kingship. You can read the whole thing. It's a message. It's explaining something to you. Now, to say, did the guy that made this, was he a designer? Was he inspired? What's the innovation there? That would be meaningless to the ancient Egyptians. They were producing a standardized things. You might have excellency of craftsmen, you had good craftsmen, you had bad craftsmen. But to say, where was the innovation here? It's difficult. This little eye, for example, just at the top, you see there's right at the top of the thing, there's this Egyptian eye. You can get it carved in stone, monumental, you can get it painted on wooden coffins, you can get it in jewellery, bottom left, and just the smallest hieroglyph. Whether you're talking about a little hieroglyph on a papyrus that's a few millimeters high to a huge great thing carved on the side of a temple, it's the same proportions, it's the same thing. It's literally set in stone. Now, something like the Egyptians, we know how they could transfer designs. Come on. Where's it going? Yeah. And this is just a typical example of how you could have a design, you could square it, so you could actually transfer and copy from one medium to another. But if we look at a piece, another piece of Tutankhamun's jewellery with an eye, is there innovation there? Innovation in terms of the way it's done? I don't know in terms of modern design whether you can look at it in that light. If we move on to Greek piece, this is the what we call the Heracles or Hercules knot. We call it the reef knot. I think you call it a square knot in the States. And this is a sort of fertility symbol. There's a couple of one there, one there. These things crop up over and over and over again in Hellenistic Greek jewellery from 300 BC to 0 BC roughly. Time and time again, they're reusing motives and ideas. A detail of an earring in the same period, about 300 BC. There's nothing really innovative about it. I don't know if I've got a little dot or a pointer here, I don't know. Anyway, there. But these little rosettes, you'll see them time and time. Every piece of Hellenistic jewellery, much the same thing, repeated on and on and on. Rather nice rings. These are Roman, about 3rd century AD. There's a type. People have written doctoral theses on the typology of Roman rings. There are types. They all fit into nice little slots. This is a particular type. The one on the left is solid gold, quite a heavy ring. The one on the right is made of very thin gold sheet over a filling material. But they're both the same type of ring. They're both style. There's no kind of design side, there's no innovation on the part of the person that made it. And I think that would be largely alien concept in the old world. Here we have 3 fairly typical 14th century British rings from the 14th century. They're all actually set with little diamonds here. But it's a type. And it's quite difficult to look back in the past and see where we have inspiration in terms of what today we would think of in jewellery terms. 15th century, a piece, German, nice example, the little ruby bottom left, sapphire, not sure what the larger stone on the bottom right is, and I think it's a garnet on the top, bit of enamel, pearls. Did the guy that produced this 500 years ago, did he sketch this? Did he have a drawing of what he was trying to produce? Did someone tell him what they wanted? Or did he have the stones and he just made something to fit the stones? We really don't know. That's the great problem with looking at old jewelry. We don't really understand this whole concept of what we mean by designing. Change cultures. Indian Mughal piece. This is probably 16th, early 17th century piece. Just a detail of a small bit set in with sort of rubies, sapphires, emeralds. Did the goldsmith sketch this on a piece of paper to work out what was going to go where, or did he know the shape, because it's a traditional shape piece, and then see what stones he had and worked out how the stones would both fit actually on the work? Because when you think about jewellery design, so people who aren't actually jewellery designers, we tend to think of nice drawings of pieces of jewellery. But I think it's probably true to say that through history, most jewellers haven't drawn accurate drawings of what they're about to make. They might do sketches, they might have got sketches they've made, of trees or leaves or whatever, as inspiration. But very few of them will produce a drawing of the final piece they're trying to produce. They'll do enough hints, and then they'll tend to work with the piece itself. And to some extent, I'm going to disappear off the edge then, and you can almost work on the object as you go forward. This is an early piece, this is a bit detailed of a piece of silverware, about 4,000 years old, but I think you can see, if I can get a little red line, you can see they've actually scratched the lines. They hasn't actually kept to them exactly going round. But they've laid out what they're going to do with the design. And I think a lot of jewellery in the past was done like this. It was sort of almost made up as it went along, because there was standardised things. The goldsmiths were producing much the same thing over and over again. I know some of you work with some jewellery companies feel much the same. Piece of Greece. This is about 800 BC. It's just a little fitting. No one's quite sure what it was used for. But again, you can see fine lines that have been scored along there to show where the dots are going to go. I don't think there was any more. That's probably the maximum kind of forethought in a lot of jewellery of that period, was this idea that you would work on things. You know the stones you've got to put in. You can visualise it in your mind and come up with a piece of jewellery. Now, the word design has got another meaning today, not rather than just an ornament, as we saw earlier. It's that design is a plan or a drawing produced to show the look or function and workings of a building, garment, or other object before it's made. And I think from most of history, that is not true of jewellery. I don't think jewellery was designed in that way. I don't think it was laid out in advance. We do get a few enigmatic things. These are Viking, so what's makes about 10th century AD, bone with carvings. And it's been suggested that these were sort of ways to working out designs to use on gold jewellery or other jewellery. It's a possibility. And when you look at actual Viking jewellery like these pieces, you can see that they're quite difficult. Now, these, I think, would be difficult to sort of plan on the hoof, as it were, as you went along. I think you'd have to somehow plan this kind of jewellery in advance. And we're now getting to the stage, this is sort of Viking things, when almost every piece is different. You get all these entwined animals, but very seldom you get two the same. So I think you're beginning to, there's some conscious thing going on here, and you get the same. I mean, it doesn't start here. You get some Scythian, Russian work, and so on. Some idea that there is a lot of planning going on, but we don't know how it was being done. And as far as I know, no one's really sort of looked into this in history. We get pieces where you have a student copying a master, here with an engraved gem. It's an old bead that was reused in Roman times, and you've had somebody carve this rather nice figure of a bull with this deity standing on the bull, and then a much cruder hand copying the design up there. And I think this is sort of a student master copying the thing. But when do we start seeing evidence for true designing in advance? Hang on. Think this is a lead model, possibly for a brooch, a ring brooch, medieval ring brooch. Now, you could say this was a model for jewellery, but someone had to design this. This isn't the design. This is the sort of further on down the line. Someone's thought about it, made this, and gone on. Now, it's only really in medieval times, or the end of the medieval period, that we begin to find, I think, evidence for actual design in art, laid out in ways that we'd recognize today. This, for example, is Leonardo sketch for The Last Supper. Now, you can't set about whether you're painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling or something, or whatever it is, or The Last Supper. You can't just do that off your top of your head as you're working on it. You've got to do it as you go along. Architects, of course, were planning things, and I think probably the Roman architects, the Greek architects, were working out pretty closely exactly what they're trying to do. But with jewellery, there's very little evidence. I mean, something like Cellini, this piece. Now, this is Cellini's famous salt cellar. It's in Vienna, and you might know the history. It disappeared. It was stolen a few years ago and then luckily retrieved with minimal damage. But I don't believe that Cellini, however brilliant he was as a goldsmith in the 16th century, could produce this just sort of on the hoof, on the bench. I think you'd have to have planned this out in some detail. We know he was a great drawer because, in fact, it was his drawings that attracted some of his clients. But drawings of other things, not of jewellery, but of drawings. We don't have Cellini drawings, but we do have other drawings. For example, there's a Dutch approximate contemporary of Cellini. And I think it's the same sort of fantasy in this pendant here, this sort of weird dragony sea creature, whatever it is, with figures on. You can see a similar sort of spirit to the salt cellar. And this is a jewellery design. So you can say, right, now, this is jewellery designing. We've now got evidence for jewellery design. The answer is yes, no. Another piece here, this is Hans Holbein the Younger, again, give or take a contemporary of Cellini. It looks almost Art Nouveau, doesn't it, this letter? It's extraordinary. But this is a drawing of jewellery. But are these jewellery designs in the way we would think of them? Here from the Victoria Albert Museum in London, we have a whole book of jewellery designs by a goldsmith called Arnold Lulls, a little bit later than Cellini, a couple of generations later. But are these jewellery designs as we know them? Well, not really, because these are actually Arnold Lulls' record of the jewellery owned by the Queen Anne of Denmark, who became the wife of James I. So it's an inventory of existing jewellery drawings. It's like today an appraiser might take photographs of a collection of jewellery. He drew the jewellery. And it's quite possible that he made some of these pieces, Arnold Lulls himself, but you can't see these drawings as design drawings in the sense of a modern goldsmith doing designs to make their inventories. And this is true right through. I mean, this is from Paris of the early 18th century, rings. I don't think these were designs done for a jeweller to work from, in the design sense. These are probably done for customers to look at and say, I like the second on the left, or whatever it is. Because there again, an awful lot, even today, a lot of jewellery designs are done for the benefit of the client, whether it's a retailer or the end customer. The goldsmith, as a sketch, they know what they've got in their mind. They've got an idea of what they want to do, and they can do a few sketches to remind themselves of what they're trying to get. But if they're trying to sell to a customer, they've got to say, this is what it's going to look like. So the design is not so much to help the goldsmith or jeweller make the piece. The design is to help sell the concept of the piece to the person who's going to pay for it, the end user. And so a lot of these designs that we see from the past, so-called jewellery designs, are not designs in the sense of the goldsmith producing working drawings from himself. They're things to sell his workmanship to a client. We have quite a lot of drawings from Barcelona. These are a couple here of jewel drawings, 1518 and 1603 dates on them. These were literally drawings of what we call masterpieces. In order to become a master jeweler, master goldsmith, you had to submit pieces that were judged by the guild, if you like, and then if they were up to scratch, then you were admitted and you were a master goldsmith. But these, again, are not designs like you might offer to a modern jewellery design competition. These were drawings of pieces the person had made and submitted. And in fact, as time went on, they got more and more ridiculous, because this is one from 1761, one of these Barcelona drawings. And the piece that was submitted is actually the little ring that the statue is dangling. That was the piece. The rest is purely incidental. So it's obvious this is a record of a piece that was made. It's not a working drawing for a jeweller. And one thing that's quite interesting, this is a fairly famous painting, well, etching rather, a coloured version of an etching from the very end of the 16th century of a jeweller and goldsmith's workshop. And you can see the guy in blue in the middle has got something in front of him. It's not an iPad, but I think it could be some sort of design, some pattern that he's actually copying. He's doing some sort of engraving or tracing or something there. But I think that, and somehow it's a frame, it might be a piece of something paper, it might be wax with a sketch. But I think this is the first thing I've found that I think one can say, that could be a jeweler following some kind of sketch or a drawing. And just to stop being too sexist about this, on the right you can see a woman goldsmith wielding a hammer with a huge deal of force. Just to say, so although I tend to talk about men goldsmiths through this talk, there are a few women in the past, and obviously forceful goldsmiths, judging by the one over there. There's all sorts of weird things going on there with odd animals doing strange things that you don't normally see in jewellery workshops. But anyway, same again with a piece like this. This is a drawing in the Victoria and Albert Museum. It looks Renaissance. And the jewellery that was made from it looked Renaissance, but in fact it was by a 19th century guy, Ronald Vastas, who was copying a lot of Renaissance jewellery. But again, we don't know if these drawings were for him to work from or to somehow work with a client or whoever was paying for them. So let's go back to Cellini briefly. Cellini is in many ways one of the first of a trend, isn't he? Because we know the name. I don't know if any of you have read his autobiography. Vanity is a word that springs to mind. I mean, he was good at what he did, but he knew it. But he was known. People knew him. They asked for him. He was a known name. He was almost like the first jewellery brand in a way. People wanted a Cellini piece. And this is what happened particularly in the 19th century. The idea that where the jeweller becomes a known person. He's not just some craftsman worker in the background producing things for the sort of the rich clientele. He becomes part of the society. And this next thing, there's a detail of a piece by Castellani. This is Augusto Castellani. I'm not sure which one it is, but anyway, Castellani family. And this people will go to Rome to go to Castellani's shop to buy his jewellery. He was kind of, if you like, the first celebrity jewellery designer, where jewellery design is associated with a name. Because we can look at ancient engraved gems, these engraved gemstones, and some of them are signed by the engraver. But there is no gold jewellery from the ancient world that bears the name of the goldsmith. There's a few things with names scratched on, more likely, though, the name of the owner of the piece rather than the maker. So the 19th century saw this idea of the designer becoming something important in the society. Say Cellini, possibly, but I mean, it's really a 19th century phenomenon. I showed the Statue of Liberty. I've got to balance this. Being British, this is, of course, Nelson. This is in 1839, there was a competition in the UK for a monument to Lord Nelson after his brilliant victories in the Napoleonic Wars. They wanted a monument to him, and there were architects and artists who were asked to draw up plans and drawings for a suitable memorial to him. And this was the result. And that's the actual thing superimposed. Now, an interesting debate arose during this, because they said, what happens if the artist and the sculptor are different people? Because the idea that somehow the person that made the design and the person that was actually going to realize the design could be different people hadn't really entered people's heads. But with a thing like this, maybe the sculptor's not an artist and the artist is not a sculptor. I don't know what the results of the debate was, but in the end, the piece was made. But at least the idea was coming up, what's what in art and design. In 1839, that's a fair bit earlier than same year, 1839, a Mr. Hudson won £5 5 for the best design for jewellery in the Elizabethan style at the annual awards of the School of Design in London. This is the first reference I found in England to a prize for jewellery design as a thing in itself. That's 1839. And then a few years later, there's another prize in Birmingham, designs. He won slightly more, I think, Mr. Thomas Cock. So jewellery design's coming in. This is a famous piece. I don't know if it exists now. This is by Fabergé. This is one of a few years ago, they found a lot of design books, or 2 large design books for Fabergé. This is one of the designs for it. Necklace. Again, whether this was produced by a designer to go to the person who was going to make it, or whether this was to try and show the design to the Tsar or whoever the customer was going to be, say, this is what we can produce for you, sire. We don't know. Now, in the States, I've got to talk about America a bit here, I think. in America, we found something in 1899, the Jeweler's Circular and Horological Review actually refers to a new movement in art jewellery and talks about jewellery design by a guy called Colonna. You probably know this guy's name. He's German-born, became a famous American designer. And he was actually working for Mr. Bing, who set up the whole Art Nouveau thing in Paris. So here in America, we have this is the first reference really I found to a sort of a jewellery design as an end in itself in the end. So I think there's a sort of a pattern here, but it's an awful lot to think about and work out still on the history of jewellery design and what it actually means. And I can't give you the answers, I can just try and raise a few of the questions. So, nice slide here. Let's move on to tomorrow. Where is jewellery design going, and about the devaluation design? Now, I don't want to upset anybody, I don't mind being controversial, I don't want to insult anybody. The first thing is, what do we mean? What is designer jewellery? Now, this made sense. In the 1970s, the term designer jewellery starts to be used. And it's used as a contrast to fine jewellery. The standard, sort of Fifth Avenue, Bond Street, whatever, jewellery was the traditional diamond stuff. And contrasting with that was designer jewellery by the new wave of sort of jewellery designers coming up there. I mean, in England, you have people like Andrew Gremer, Gerda Flockington, people like that. I'm not really into the American scene. And this was known as designer jewellery. You get the expression used sometimes in the 1970s, and it comes in more in the 1980s. But now, designer jewellery is everywhere. Just sort of designer jewellery, designer jewellery, designer jewellery. What on earth does it mean? I tried to find definitions of designer jewellery. And one off the web, Google's wonderful, isn't it? You can find all sorts of wonderful, useful, and nonsensical stuff here. This is one definition, which is not a bad one. Designer jewellery is fashionable yet affordable jewellery which is manufactured in relatively small numbers from bespoke jewellery designers. And there's another definition from Mr. Google, a creative piece of jewellery that is identifiable with the artist who made it. Now, these are quite lofty aspirations, aren't they? So it's something that's made in small numbers by an identifiable artist. How many of you know Alibaba.com, which is one of the main sort of mass production thing? Here we have designer jewellery. I think there were 1,500,000 hits on Alibaba for designer jewellery. It was something quite ridiculous. And here we have, I don't know if you can, this is a close-up here, 500 pieces, huge production capacity. And it doesn't name the designer. So this thing is by a named designer in limited numbers. Here we have huge production capacity by an anonymous designer. So this is designer jewellery. So what is? I think designer jewellery now is just another word for costume jewellery. I think that's true. And just yesterday, I was going past a very upmarket jewellery store, and I took a photograph, and I thought, this proves it. So now, the problem is here that we can't use the term designer jewellery to mean we have some fine jewellery designers in the audience here. Some of the great names. I would think you'd all run a mile now if we referred to you as producing designer jewellery, because it's been completely devalued. And this whole devaluation of design has been a big thing in the recent years. A lot of debate going on in sort of the wider design field in industrial design and graphic design, this devaluation design. And some of you might have heard of a guy, a German industrial designist, Dieter Rams. He's sort of seen as one of the biggest inspiration. He worked for Braun in the 1950s, 60s, and even Apple have said he was one of the sort of the biggest inspirations for things like the iPhone design and so on. Now, he said, I think it's rather nice, design is not simply an adjective to place in front of a product's name to somehow artificially enhance its value. And I think today a lot of marketers should read that and take heed of it. So what do we mean by design, and where's it going? Well, aesthetics is an important part. It has to be beautiful. But that's a very, very subjective thing. Everyone has different ideas. Just have a look at the wallpaper in other people's houses to know that people have different ideas about beauty and what's going on. Just an example here. There was an exhibition a couple of years ago in New York on Van Cleef, Set in Style. Some of you might have seen this exhibition, a nice exhibition of jewellery. The American edition of the catalogue is on the left and the British one is on the right. They chose different pieces for the front cover because the piece on the left, quite frankly, doesn't appeal to the English. It's sort of rather brash, it's a bit bright, it's over-stylized, whereas the bit on the right is nicely classic. So you see, there's no uniform idea of aesthetics. So you can't, I mean, in aesthetics, it doesn't rarely come in to judging jewellery design. You can't say it has to be beautiful. I mean, it doesn't matter. As long as somebody buys it, it doesn't really matter if anybody else thinks it's beautiful or not. Innovation is an important part of design. Because if it's not innovative, then it's not design. Otherwise, it just cuts something else, isn't it? So it's got to have something new. But it doesn't just mean innovation in form or shape, because it means form and shape, but also it can be innovative in material, a totally new use of material, or a way material is treated, or it can be about construction. A new construction, innovative way of constructing something. Innovation by itself in terms of shape, I think is a dangerous thing. I mean, there again, I don't want to upset anybody here, but I go around quite a lot of jewellery design shows, particularly sort of students, design schools and jewellery making schools, and you look at pieces and you think, some of them are just trying to be different. There's nothing else to recommend them apart from imagination, and they're not particularly beautiful, they're not particularly well made, they're nothing. Their guiding force is to make something that nobody else has made before. They don't care about anything else, as long as it's different. That's not enough. And I'm not the only one to say that. I think, again, my Dieter Rams, this German industrial designer, I think said it far more beautifully. He said, things which are different in order simply to be different are seldom better, but that which is made to be better is almost always different. And I think that's a nice thing to have as a sort of a leitmotif, whatever you like, for jewellery. Now, we've had innovation, the important thing. The other thing is individual. Now, I say individual rather than individuality because there's sort of two meanings. A piece should be individual because it's special in itself. And I think also it has to be identifiable with an individual, a named designer. This is a problem. I'm going to probably upset some people now. This is an amazing piece of jewellery. This is one of the Duke of Windsor pieces. This is Cartier's original book. There's the drawing of the piece on the bottom left in the book, and then there's a sort of equivalent version superimposed over the top. When Cartier, one of the Cartier family, were designing the jewellery, it's Cartier designed jewellery. But if it's, this is personal, don't necessarily expect anyone to agree with this, but if it's a piece sold by one of the big houses, let's say this is just taken at random, I'm nothing against Boucheron, but this is Boucheron jewellery. This is a brand. I don't know who made it. Mr. Boucheron didn't make these, design them. Now, if I go to one of your wonderful art galleries, contemporary art galleries, let's say, and so I go in the door and they show the works of 20 great American artists, but every single piece is signed by the name of the gallery. You'd feel shortchanged. This isn't art, is it? So I think to be proper jewellery design today, a piece of jewellery design, it has to be associated with an individual, not just a brand name. You might like Boucheron jewellery, for example. Let's say I'm just taking the name around. You might like them because you like their particular style. They've got a house style. The same way as the contemporary art gallery might have a particular house style of the sort of art they deal in. But I think unless you know the name of the artist, identifiable, I really feel that you'll get quite a long way from jewellery design. Now, traditionally, jewellery design was this, wasn't it? You drew the little pictures and you did it. It's now switching over to CAD, design the thing on CAD. And this is setting up all sorts of problems for the future. And I don't know, this is something that I think a lot of the jewellery organisations and the snags of the world should be actually starting to think about, because the jewellery industry, whether you're talking about the gemstone world or anything else, tends to try to run around closing stable doors after they've all been firmly opened by a lot of angry horses. There are a lot of things that can happen in the design jewellery world that I think people need to start thinking about now. Traditionally, see, here we have a sketch for a bracelet, inspired by the sea, the waves of the sea. You may or may not like the design, but it's a pretty design. Produced in CAD, here's the thing, and a rendering of the final version. In different colour golds, the blue enamel, this is inspired by the sea. And does anyone like this as design, out of interest? Nobody? No. It doesn't actually matter, because this was actually random generated by a computer. It's all CAD. It's never been made. It's never existed. It's never actually existed in anyone's imagination. This was a plug-in to Rhino, which produces, you say, basically, I want something that'll go around a wrist, and the whole rest. I mean, I must admit that the different colors were added by humanity, if you like, but the form and the shape was random generated by a computer. And this is more and more plug-ins. You've got to thank Hollywood for this, because then if you see, was it Monsters, Inc., many years ago? That was a groundbreaker because they worked out how you could have individual hair on animated creatures that moved like real hair. And since then, all these things, the recent thing, Frozen, there's whole new technology developed on how to get snow to look like snow. And this is now, you can buy plugins. This is a random bubbles thing that will produce all sorts of interesting shapes, totally randomly, in Rhinoceros, which is one of the engines used for most of the jewelry rendering software today. This is a rather interesting surface. Whatever you want to call it, structural surface. Again, this is generated randomly by a computer. You feed in basic parameters of what you want, and it'll generate these things randomly. So if you've got a jewelry designer now clicking, going through, no, I don't like that, click, no, I don't like that, click, oh, that's rather nice. Press a button, the thing goes off and is automatically turned into a thing with three-dimensional printing. So the jewelry designer's task then is to decide whether the thing the computer is generating randomly is pretty or not. And then just click the button to say, make this one when they want to make that one. Now that might sound far-fetched, but this idea of randomness coming into art is not a new one. Again, this is apparently a painting by Jack Armstrong, a famous American artist. I mean, I just chose him because it happened to be the picture I was looking for on the web. Now, I don't believe this was planned in detail. I don't think it was a sketch showing where each little splatter of paint was going to be. This is largely the result of random flecks of paint, and he stopped when he got to a part that he liked. Said, that looks really nice, that's good enough. Oh, maybe one more flick, that's it, perfect. So you see, this idea of using random things to produce art is not unknown. And this is going to come into the jewelry world. And I say now you've got the design on the computer, you press a button, and I don't know how many of you here, I think it was a couple of years ago when they talked about this 3D printing in gold. So the whole thing can be produced. Now, where does this leave the jewelry designer? Can you imagine a world where the consumer can go on the computer, look at a few ideas for sort of jewelry, and then have a series of random generated things come up on the screen that the sort of thing they fit, say, well, that's really pretty, I like that, press a button, the thing is automatically sent off, 3D printed, whatever it is, hallmarked and sent, with no jewelry designer there at all. Now, I don't think that's far-fetched. It could happen. I mean, the technology exists today. So designers have to think how they're going to stay part of this, because this is the traditional, this is the jewelry designer making the piece at the bench. In a way, the skill might have gone a little bit downstream a little bit when you've got the designer is now carving the wax that goes off to be cast. Where's the skill of the jeweler? What is it, carving wax? I know there's been, I won't say which, I know one major organisation had a huge row recently with somebody who was carving waxes and was thrown out because he wasn't a master goldsmith because he was only a wax carver. The final result doesn't seem to matter if he's producing beautiful pieces or not. The fact he was not a skilled bench craftsman, he was good at carving waxes. Big problem in the modern jewellery world. I do a lot of, well, not a lot, but quite a lot of judging of jewellery design competitions. I've still chosen one here which is Chinese, because most of you won't be been part of it. I personally always protest that I cannot judge jewellery design from a drawing. I've got to see the piece. It might look pretty, but does it balance? Does it fit? Does it feel nice in the hand? Is it well made? Just the form is not enough. It has to look good. It has to be made nicely in some way. It has to be a work of craftsmanship to be true jewellery design. So I really object to judging jewellery design competition based on drawings only. And this is even worse when you get CAD. This is from another, also the same jewellery design competition. The ring here, this is a computer-generated thing. That ring has never existed. Now, I don't think this one won the competition. I don't think it's particularly innovative or particularly beautiful as a ring. But you've got a problem. You can say that the CAD artist, jeweler producing this, you can say to them afterwards, well, that's very nice, but with these little pads on the thing, how do you get the stones in? And the computer is really good at reproducing this mirror polish on everything. How are you actually going to polish inside that when the thing is made? And the guy at the CAD machine with his mouse is going to say, I don't know, I didn't think about that. So there are so many things to jewellery design rather than just coming up with something that looks pretty in a CAD or pretty in a drawing. This, you might recognize this. This is Jar. Now, Jar's an interesting designer because whether or not you like his designs, or whether you like the idea of the Met putting on a show for him or not, that's irrelevant. As a designer, he's interesting because before any piece is made, he discusses it with the workshops. How can we do this? What technology are we going to use? Will this work? How is the balance? How's it going to work? There's a part, if you like, I mean, Jar might not get his hands dirty on every piece, but he's involved intellectually on every step of the construction, the materials they use, what kind of alloys, and how will it actually hang, what will it fit like. And I think that's probably the essence of jewellery design, is for the jewellery designers to be a continuing part of society, an important part, is for this idea of a holistic thing. They're a named person, an artist, who is involved from the very basics right through, understanding the earrings might look pretty on paper, but do they balance on the ear properly? It's got to be holistic right through. But what do you call them? I mean, you can't call them designer jewelers now, because that's been completely devalued. And I don't know what artist jeweler sort of comes up with the imaginations of things done in rubber and broken bottle tops or something rather, doesn't it? So I don't know what to call it. So I think the next competition is what you call a modern jewellery designer that actually reflects the skill that's going into it. Because I say we've had this huge devaluation in the term of word design. Anyway, no. So primacy of design, yes, design is all important. But I think you need to think about what you actually mean by design in a jewellery context. And if you can come up with an idea of what we can actually call jewellers today that recognise that what they do, I think it'd be a good step forward. Thank you very much indeed. I can try and answer a question, but I think I've asked more. I think I've asked enough questions for the morning, probably. Any? No. That's too easy an answer. There are some things that we think should, but I think reverse it. We can look at a piece like that pre-Columbian thing, something like that. Now that appeals enormously to the modern. Well, it's to some of us. It appeals. It's a slightly quirky, fun thing. Now I think we're seeing it through totally different eyes from the time. Now the person from back 2,000 years ago in South America could see, I don't know, Bulgari brooch. They wouldn't see it in the same way we see it. So, I think this ideas. I think some aesthetics probably transcend time. There might be classics, but I think it'd be very difficult to identify what they are. And I think it's probably slightly vain to think we can do it, and that the thing that we recognise as beautiful is the same they would have recognised 100 years, 1,000 years ago. I remember when I first entered the jewellery business in the 1970s, we were scrapping Art Deco like there was no tomorrow. Nobody wanted it. Victorian was wonderful. Art Nouveau was a little bit quirky, and a few weirdos like that stuff, but this Art Deco was ugly. And we were breaking the things up. It's terrible. Now you look at this is iconic pieces we're breaking up. Could have viewed it differently. There's a slight problem in the jewellery design world, because when I started in the 70s, it was after it's probably in the 60s it happened. It was after the first sort of generation after the Second World War was growing up. The world had changed. You had, particularly, this sounds a bit sexist, but lots of daughters, the Lady Athanasia Trumpington Blackguard, what's she going to do? She doesn't want to, she needs to work for a living, which is the first female member of her family who ever had to do so, but she doesn't want to be a secretary. Good Lord, no. So what's she going to do? She starts dealing in antique jewellery. London, I don't know about you, London blossoms with these young people selling antique jewellery. I call them the dilettantes. It was a kind of whole movement. And then suddenly they must have obviously sold out. So then the next generation all wanted to be jewellery designers. And there are hundreds and hundreds still of young things whose ambition is to be a jewellery designer. And everyone has different ideas. And I mean, they're sold to their family. Their mother thinks it's a really pretty pin, therefore they're a great jewelry designer. So there isn't, there's no kind of standard, I think, for jewelry. The things you like, the things I like. The fact that there is great art that everyone, I mean, I can look at the Great Pyramids and say that's magnificent, and I'm sure Pharaoh, whatever it was, 5,000 years ago, looked at them and said, my God, that's magnificent. But I think we're seeing it through totally different eyes. I think to say there's a common factor there is pushing it, because I don't think one can ever identify what that common factor was. I don't think there's an inherent idea of aesthetics in the human mind. The things we like, the things we don't like. Sorry, that's probably a Philistine point of view, but I don't.
I think there has to be a separation between one's personal aesthetics and perhaps a more generalized sense of total aesthetics. That's
I'm not, yeah, food for thought. I read Tutankhamun's piece wrong, Harry, did I?
Well, I think that if you look at, you take it down to a more, a smaller level, there are certain motifs in jewelry that are common throughout time and cultures. For example, the Egyptian spiral. You see it in ancient Egypt, you see it in Norse jewelry, and it's appealing to children. They like certain forms, and there's something about it that just seems to appeal across cultural boundaries. You see it in Asian jewelry.
Yeah.
Maybe that's.
There are common motifs, but I agree there are common motives that somehow appeal, but I'm not sure they're seen in the same light. I don't know how one defines how they're seen. I don't think anyone can actually define how we see things. And that sounds silly, doesn't it? You know what I mean? I think it's very difficult. But there are certainly things that there's a common appeal in certain forms, but whether we're viewing that they appeal for the same reasons or not, it's a big question. If you want to hit me, the coffee break coming up.